Normally, everyone conducting an arbitration proceedings keep eye on Section 34 of the Arbitration Conciliation Act. After the amendment of 2015, one must keep in mind that the proviso to Section 15(2)(a) clearly mentions that the award shall not be set aside merely on the ground of erroneous application of law or by a reappreciation of evidence. Therefore, one must keep in mind that under Section 34, court will not go into reappreciating the evidence. In Catena of Judgments, the apex court has clearly mentioned that the arbitrator is the main judge of the evidence recorded before him. It is the arbitrator who is the final decision maker as far as the quantity and quality of the evidence recorded before it is concerned. It is the tribunal, while passing an award, will consider whether the evidence recorded before it was sufficient on the part of the claimant or the respondent, as the case may be, to award a favorable order in favor of the claimant or the respondent. Therefore, friends, evidence is very important before the tribunal. It may not be important later on for the power section 34, but to succeed in the matter, weightage has to be given to the evidence which you have been conducting before the tribunal. Since we are on the topic of trial before the tribunal, in this speech, I do not intend to take other sections pertaining to Arbitration Act regarding section 1 to 17, because they are not connected with the trials. The sections which are connected to the trials starts from 17 onwards. So therefore, in this speech, I would like to cover all those relevant sections which are pertaining to trial itself before the arbitral tribunal. According to me, the trial begins before the tribunal as soon as the notice of invocation is issued. Section 21 of the Act states that arbitral proceedings in respect of any particular dispute commences on the date on which a request for that dispute being referred to arbitration is received by the respondent. Therefore, for the purpose of the limitation, Section 21 becomes very important. Similarly, since it is said that commencement of the arbitral proceeding, it presupposes that whatever dispute one intends to refer to arbitration shall be spelled out in the notice itself. This is important because on several occasions during the tribunal proceedings, when the points of determination are to be finalized, the question often arises whether such dispute was raised at the first place or first instance. The first instance is, of course, the invocation notice. Sometimes we do take up the contention that the statement of claim has traveled beyond the scope of invocation notice. Therefore, friends, it is always better to draft an invocation notice in such a manner that whatever dispute, according to the claimant, has arisen between the parties should be properly reflected. Not only that, if the notice is properly worded, it will help the draftsman of the statement of claim to word it properly and he doesn't miss out the main claims which he has to claim and how he has to claim, what are requirements of statement. I'll come it little later on. But therefore, the invocation notice becomes the first part of your trial. Your invocation notice should be properly given. It should not be in 2-3 pages. It should contain the more important aspect of matter, the actual dispute which have been arising between the parties, actual claims between the parties should be properly spelled out claim wise. It is always advisable that after setting out some of the facts pertaining the dispute, claim 1, claim 2, claim 3 are properly set out in the invocation notice, and at the end of each claim, the amount claim also should be set out. So it is always advisable, and that will help you at the time of final arguments, also at the time of leading evidence also. Second thing is that the notice should also always contain the name of the arbitrator. People do not give name of the arbitrator. They simply say that I'm invoking the arbitration. That is not enough. You have to invoke the arbitration as per the arbitration clause. If you have to appoint your arbitrator, you appoint the arbitrator and give 30 days time to other side to concur with that appointment. Or if it is a sole arbitrator under the agreement, then you have to go on section 11. If there are two arbitrators on each side, one arbiter each side, then after their appointment, you can both of them can appoint the presiding arbitrator. Therefore, your name of the arbitrator is necessary to mention in the notice itself. And 30 days period also should be provided for and asking other side either to concur with the appointment or not to concur or appoint his own arbitrator. That is necessary, and that is the beginning of your trial before the tribunal. This is section 21. But for the purpose of procedural aspect, section 19 is prior in time. Though invocation is there, it is there under section 7, read with section 11, all those are there. But for the purpose of the trial, the arbitrator's powers are set out in section 19. Section 19 allows the tribunal with the consent of parties to conduct the proceeding in the agreed manner. Now, therefore, section 19 has got two choices. Either your arbitration agreement itself provides for a procedural aspect which can be set out in the agreement itself. If that is not possible or it is not being done, then in that event, even parties can agree to a particular format and particular form of conducting the trial. So under 19, the arbitrator has got powers, but the procedure can be fixed preferably by consent of parties. If it is not, then of course arbitrator has got powers to fix his own procedure if parties do not agree to it. Section 19 also becomes important for this reason, that section 19 says that Evidence Act or CPC is not binding on the tribunal. When it is said that CPC and Evidence Act is not binding on the tribunal, what is meant by the strict rules mentioned in the CPC or Evidence Act are not binding, but principles of CPC, principles of Evidence Act, it is still binding. An arbitrator cannot proceed on the basis of in a matter when it violates the principle of natural justice. Now that is requirement of basic principles of law. And second thing is the word used is that shall not be bound by CPC and Evidence Act. Therefore, only to that extent the strictest proof is not required. What is required before a trial court? In a trial court, if a document is required to prove, it has to be proved in a particular manner set out in Evidence Act. While in the arbitration tribunal, you have got choice. You can select the procedure, and arbitrator will say that I am not strictly bound by the provisions of Evidence Act. I will allow the document to be marked in exhibit if basic principles are covered. Now, under 19.4, if you see, there's one more power. It gives the power to tribunal to determine admissibility, relevance, materiality, and weight of evidence. Therefore, this section gives very wide power as far as evidence is concerned to the tribunal. The tribunal can determine the admissibility of evidence and admissibility of documents both. This is the full wide power to give the tribunal. It can also decide the relevancy of the evidence. It can decide the relevancy of the document. It can decide the relevancy on questions put during cross-examination. So that part is also given, that power is also given to the tribunal to decide on the relevancy. And finally, the material evidence is come forward or not also has to be decided, and weightage to be given to the evidence. This also is within the powers of the tribunal. Friends, therefore keep in mind why evidence becomes important for a trial before the tribunal is this, that under section 19, it is arbitrary tribunal who is going to decide the admissibility, it is who is going to decide the relevancy, who is going to decide materiality, and finally the weightage given to the evidence recorded before it. Therefore, never take it lightly before the tribunal when evidence is to be recorded. In view of these provisions, one must be careful to show the admissibility not only of the documents but relevant evidence as its relevancy and materiality. So you should be ready when you are relying upon a particular document or a particular fact or particular witness. You should be ready with the answer if the tribunal puts a question on relevancy, on materiality, that why it is relevant and why it should be allowed in the evidence. That part of it you should be always ready and never be taken by surprise, because you always keep in mind that tribunal may ask you any question any given time on the admissibility of a particular document, or other side might object to admissibility of a particular document or relevancy of a particular question. So you must take how to keep this in mind. Since the tribunal is free to determine weightage to evidence, proper and cogent evidence should be led before the tribunal, because it is the base on which the arbitral tribunal will decide in one's favor. This appreciation of evidence will be based for your 34 also to succeed. Now we come to an important matter being heart of the proceeding, the statement of claim and statement of while drafting the statement of claim or statement of defense as the case may be, one must after introductory paragraph bring out clear and positive case in a statement of claim or the written statement. It is very necessary that in a trial like a plaint, when you mention the facts, your submission should be there. Similarly, in a statement of claim, you must come out with a positive case how you are proving a particular aspect. Keep in mind that statement of claim or the written statement is not evidence. It is the base for you to lead evidence later on. Tomorrow, other side should not object that this case is not put forward in the statement of claim or in your invocation notice, and therefore this will not be allowed. One thing I must also tell you, that as I told you, invocation notice should contain more or less all the claims, but it is not necessary that every claim which is not mentioned in the invocation notice cannot be claimed in the statement of claim. You can go beyond the invocation notice also, but only thing is, when you go beyond the invocation notice and the scope, you must explain on what basis are you claiming and how you are going to succeed in proving that. You must keep in mind when evidence is to be led. When you draft a statement of claim, keep in mind the burden of proof also. You must also keep in mind that through which witness and how a particular document or particular fact you are going to prove at a later stage. So, statement of claim is not merely a drafting of facts. It is materially important to know how you are going to prove those facts. The statement of claim should be prepared on the basis of future proving of documents and the facts. Second thing is, when you prepare a statement of claim, try to give heading after the facts are over. Try to give a heading of claim number one. Then go along with the claim number one. Explain claim number one, how you are alleging to prove the claim number one. And then at the end of it, you must come out what is the claim amount and how you are claiming as per your particulars of claim, which will be annexed. Second thing, in a statement of claim, it is not necessary that every document which you want to rely upon has to be annexed to the statement of claim. The document which are necessary to be annexed to the statement of claim or the written statement are the basic document which, if not annexed, would make you fail in your trial. For example, if you are relying upon some admission in a particular letter by the other side, then it would be advisable not only to set out the admission in the body of your statement of claim or the written statement, but annex that very letter or document to the statement of claim or the written statement. That you keep in mind. Second thing is, people are forming habits. By letter dated so and so, claimant said this, respondent said this. It is not necessary for you to put every wordings of the letter in your body of the statement of claim or the written statement. What is relevant paragraph of a particular letter. If you feel that it is to the goes to the root of the matter, you can put that. Otherwise, merely you can say by voluminous correspondence between the parties, the claimant said this, in short, and then annex those letters, or you crave leave to refer to have those letters. That will be very easy for you to draft a statement of claim, and similarly your written statement. While drafting the written statement, keep this in mind that mere denial is not enough. You must deny particulars with deny the statements with particulars with a positive case. On what basis are you denying those statements? Because that is also necessary when you plead evidence on behalf of the defendants to show how you have denied or disputed this particular fact or particular letter. The positive case in a literal sense means that one must come out with the history of the matter, basis for the dispute and the claims in the dispute. So far as the statement of claim, one must, after giving brief history, as I told you, divide the statement of claim para-wise and claim-wise. That is always better. After the statement of claim is prepared, check the particulars of claim also. The particulars of claim should be annexed to the statement of claim, and you must properly set out how you are claiming the amount and how an interest is calculated on that amount. If you are relying upon any clauses of the agreement, you may set out those clauses, but it's not necessary that you must try to interpret those clauses in a statement of defense or statement of claim, because there is no requirement for reproduction of every clause in the agreement. Agreement speaks for itself. You are annexing the agreement or you are craving leave. Preferably, if the agreement is not voluminous, try to annex it to the statement of claim. If it's voluminous, then of course you rely upon the relevant clauses in your body, and you rely upon the whole contract at a particular stage. Now, if your claim prima facie, one of the claim or two claims or three claims are barred by limitation, then it is necessary that you must give reasons why, according to you, these claims are not barred, and what documentary evidence are you relying upon to show that the claim is not barred by law of limitation. That is necessary to be put into. Now, similar principles after the amendment to 2015, when a counter claim is filed, the counter claim will be like statement of claim or the written statement. You must point out all the claims and how you are claiming that amount under the statement of the counter claim. The next part important is the point of determination. So after the pleadings are filed, then the next issue arises, point of determination. I have come across various people drafting 50, 60 issues on the basis of every statement where there is assertion by one side and denied by other side, forming part of issues. No, that is not correct. Issues are for the purpose of convenience of the parties, or points of determination are for the convenience of parties and for the tribunal to understand how to go about when award is to be drafted, and it is useful to parties to understand how and what issues are relevant to be proved by that particular party. So that is the base for the point of determination. I would advise you that always take basic claims as the points of determination. After the basic claims are put out in the points of determination, if any additional issues are required, you can consider it, including the counter claim. So please see to it your points of determination are not very high numbers. It should be limited and to the extent of the claims, and no claim amount should be left out in determining the points of determination. For example, you've got 5 claims. The first 5 points of determination should be whether the claimant is entitled to rupees so and so as per claim so and so, whether claimant is entitled to so and so as per claim so and so. That way you go about, that will be easier for you at the time of leading evidence also and proving your documents. After the points of determination is filed, the next stage is filing of compilation of documents and admission and denial of documents. The compilation of documents should be consisting of documents annexed to the pleadings and documents crave leave to refer to upon in the pleadings. Over and above these documents, one can also file correspondence intra-party if they are not referred to or not relied upon in the statement of claim. Therefore, your compilation document is not required to be restricted to only documents referred to in the plain and referred to in the statement of claim or annexed to the statement of claim. You can go beyond that if documents are available to prove your case, because by that time you have known the points of determination, you have learned what evidence is required to be produced or adduced by you to succeed in the matter. Now, after you receive the compilation of documents from other side, one must see the documents from the other side if they form part of linking chain. This question will, what does linking chain mean? What happens is, when documents are exchanged between the parties and admission denials of documents are also to be done by the parties, people do not apply their mind. They simply seek a deny a particular document, and later on is found that the document is referred to in another letter which is admitted by the party. For example, if there is a letter written on 10th of July and there is a reply by other side on 12th of July referring to 10th of July letter, and then again 12th of July letter is also replied by the claimant by 14th July letter, and there is a reference to 10th and 12th July in both the letters. This is known as linking chain. So all these letters show a link, how the document started, how the link started, how they have been denied, and how they've been dealt. Now, if these documents are forming part of linking chain as held by the apex court, it is, you cannot deny these documents. This judgment of Mubarak Ali's case is very important, 1956 Supreme Court, which clearly points out what is linking chain. So when linking chain is there, it is always advisable, therefore, to check every document before you deny a document, that whether this document is referred to in any of the correspondence between the parties, and if it is there, then it cannot be denied. Now, what is to be denied? If the document forms part of linking chain, the denial should not be of the existence of the document. So far as the contents of the documents are concerned, you can always deny it. Existence of a document and contents of a document, two different things altogether. One may say that I have received this letter, but I am not admitting the contents of it. That is permissible. Therefore, whenever you receive admission denial notices, please check all the correspondence, whether you have replied to or dealt with that particular letter before you deny the existence of the correspondence. Existence is automatically proved by linking chain. You may deny the contents of those documents if, because contents will be denied otherwise also during your correspondence intra-party. These types of letters were required to be admitted only to the extent of existence, and the contents of the letters can be denied. Now, if your client is sure that a letter has been delivered to other side, but there is no acknowledgement, in such a case, the next option available to you is to give notice to produce. So before admission denial of document, you can always give notice to produce to other side. Please produce the original document, because suppose you have written a letter to other side and you don't have an acknowledgement of that, you can still call upon them to produce the original of that letter. If he produces, the original comes back in your hand, automatically you did not have to prove that document, but existence is not to be proved. But suppose he does not produce that document, then it will be open for you to lead secondary evidence. As per section 61 of Evidence Act, the contents of the documents may be either primary or by secondary evidence. Section 62 defines primary evidence, means the document itself, and section 63 of the Evidence Act defines secondary evidence such as certified copies, copies made from the original by mechanical process, copies made and compared with the original or other oral document account of the content document given by some person who has seen it. Therefore, if a document is original is not produced after notice to produce, then now you know that you have to need evidence of proving that document by secondary evidence. You can lead evidence of a person who has seen the document with making it Xerox and who has compared with the original. You can take evidence of the person who has drafted the letter. You can lead evidence of the person who has sent the letter. So there are various things you can decide once you know that the document is admitted by other side or not. So existence of the document and admissibility of that is very important during admission denial of document. Therefore, if you keep in mind that whenever you want to lead a secondary evidence, because you are not having the originals with you, you might be required to lead secondary evidence. If secondary evidence is required to be led, it is always better that you decide this at the time of admission denial of documents and give notice to produce documents or notice to admit documents. Now, for example, if the party you give notice to produce document and the party produces that document, the existence of that document is proved. You did not need evidence to prove the existence. The next step you can take up is asking the parties to admit the document. Suppose, for example, there are correspondence intra-party or there are agreements intra-party. You can give notice to other side to admit the contents of that document. That is known as notice to admit document. If other side admits the contents of document or admits the document, then no evidence is required to prove the contents of that document also. That will curtail your evidence part. So therefore, at the admission denial stage, it is always advisable to give notice to produce and notice to admit document. Now, after this admission denial is over, based on denial of documents, one can decide leading evidence. Now, before you file affidavit of evidence, one more thing I would advise people to take up is asking other side to answer interrogatories. Now, what are interrogatories? Interrogatories are questions put by one side to the other side to cut short the evidence. Interrogatories have to be answered on oath by the person concerned, the witness who is going to lead evidence on that other side. And not only that, the interrogatories are always forming part of the evidence. Therefore, if you put questions in interrogatories, never get worried if what happens, whether it will be part of the evidence or not. Yes, it will form part of the evidence itself. But keep in mind that whenever you draw interrogatories, the question should be formed in such a manner that the answer cannot go beyond yes or no. If you give leverage to other side to give long answer, what happened thereafter? Why did you do this? Now these questions will open Pandora's box and they will give long answers which will become your evidence because you have called upon by interrogate to answer some questions. Therefore, I would always advise if you're drawing up interrogatories to cut short the evidence on your part, draw questions in such a manner that the answer should only be yes or no and not beyond that. Never give big questions to the other side to answer. It will be difficult. Now, after interrogate over, then we come to the next thing is the drafting of affidavit and list of witnesses. Now, how do you prepare the list of witnesses? First principle of Evidence Act is try to minimize the witnesses because if you have more witnesses, the chances of contradictions between them will be brighter. And as it is said, too many cooks spoil the food, too many witnesses spoil the matter. So it is always advisable that you have less witnesses in the evidence. So try to put those witnesses up because now by this time you have got admission denials with you. You have known the interrogatories, you have gone evidence of documents which have been admitted by other side, and notice to produce claim. So all steps are over. So now you can assess. And now I want to lead only two witness evidence, three witness evidence, which will prove my positive case. Only lead evidence of those witnesses which you feel that a particular document, suppose for example, is denied by other side and that is very important for you, then you may lead us evidence of that particular witness to prove that document. But merely a document is denied by other side and that document is not very important for you, please don't lead evidence of one witness for only one document. That is not advisable, because the law evidence also further says that once the witness is put into witness box, he can be questioned on any line of cross examination, any document, any facts pertaining to matter in issue. He cannot be restricted in cross examination to only one letter for which you have put him in the witness box. So therefore, if it is very important, then only you put that witness into box. Otherwise, try to avoid putting witness only for proving one or two documents. Now, when you start drafting the affidavit of evidence, please do not convert your statement of claim or the written statement from into first person evidence. I am seeing that very often. And at the end of the statement of claim and the written statement, the claimant therefore submits this entitled to this, or written defendant therefore submits entitled to this. This is not, this is evidence. Evidence cannot have any submission in itself. Some people I see putting prayers also in the affidavit of evidence. No, this is not permissible. Your evidence has to be restricted to what the witness personally knows and what is he deposing to. Hearsay evidence also cannot be put in your affidavit of evidence unless it is not, unless you are in a position to prove at a later stage that it is not a hearsay evidence. Therefore, I would advise people that whenever you draft affidavit of evidence, keep in mind that evidence, it is restricted only to material evidence only, which is to the knowledge of the person concerned, and he is deposing to that, and to which he can withstand the cross examination. Now, if you are required to approve a particular document, then your avowment in the affidavit of evidence should be that I am the author of this document, I have signed this document, I identify my signature, the contents of this document is correct. Now, once this line, three lines are put in, the document is automatically proved in evidence. There is no further requirement of proving any contents or explanation given to the document, or any contents explanation is not required at all. So keep this in mind, that whenever you want to prove a document, if the author is there, he must identify his signature. He must say that I am the author of the document and say contents are correct. If the author himself is not available and you are bringing in person who has just seen the document signed by the person, or who has discussed the document, who has drafted the document but maybe signed by third party, then you must say in his evidence that this document was originally drafted by me, but my senior signed it. It was signed in my presence. I know his signature, identify his signature, and contents are correct as per what I had drafted. Then only a document can be proved in evidence in chief. So these are the requirements of what you should have in evidence in chief. After that, the next important topic is the cross-examination. Cross-examination should be not restricted only to the affidavit of evidence which is being given. I have seen that people take 5 pages affidavit in and put questions on the basis of what is stated there. Is no. Your cross-examination is based on your positive case in your written statement. You have to nullify the avowments made by him in his affidavit and the statement of claim. So your evidence should go much beyond than the affidavit of evidence. But as I said, the same principle apply as in the interrogatories. Don't ask questions where you give leverage to other side answer long answers. What happened thereafter? Why did you do this? Is it correct that you did this for this reason? No, this all cannot be put in cross-examination. Simultaneously, when you put is it correct, it is a suggestion. A suggestion can be put provided you are accepting that suggestion in your written statement. Otherwise, you cannot put a suggestion that is it correct. Once you say is it correct, or do you agree with me, that is the nature of suggestion which cannot be put in unless the parties agree to it. Otherwise, it will be against you at the time of final argument if you're yourself are admitting other side's case and putting a suggestion. So be careful while putting suggestions to the witness in cross examination. And as far as the cross examination is concerned, there's no bar in putting leading questions. There's no restriction. Only thing is keep in mind that your mind should be alert. Your question should be put in such a manner that the arbitrator tribunal does not lose interest in the matter or disallows the questions one after other on the ground of relevancy. So be careful when putting questions in cross examination that questions should be relevant. The interest of the tribunal continues all throughout the cross examination. The witness is not given long rope, and never move your eyes from the witness, and never express yourself if the answer is in your favor or against you. Keep these principles in mind in cross examination. If you do this, you will definitely succeed while doing the cross examination. After the cross examination is over, then the final arguments come in. You try to correlate. The most important time at that time is to keep the dates and events present in your on the table, so you know what are the points which are to be determined. Even during the cross examination, try to keep dates and events present at that particular time to check and verify what is required. And one more thing, during cross examination, never discuss any point with your lawyers or your clients. Keep this in mind. And after the evidence is over, the argument is over, try to file written submissions, because written submission now under the Amendment Act also has become necessary, and you can file the written submissions for the purpose of putting your whole case into that, including the judgment which you cite. The last point which I want to point out is this, that if you during the trial you find that some documents are in possession of third party or the third party evidence necessary, then under section 27 of the Arbitration Act, you can make an application to tribunal to permit you to make an application to the High Court for the purpose of issuing witness summons to such witness to produce his evidence. You may issue witness summons only for production of a document which you want, which is in possession of third party, or you may issue a witness summons to lead his evidence if third party is there. Suppose, for example, an employer has left you and he is not within the employment of the person concerned, and you want him to come, or you want to prove a document through government agencies, then in that event, it is advisable that you under section 27, you make an application. Similar application can be made for leading experts evidence also. So this is how all these procedures should be followed during the trial. Lastly, before closing, I must also point out that now under section 29B, there is a provision of fast track arbitration, where you must keep in mind that the powers to call for information, clarification from the parties left to the discretion of the tribunal. Oral hearing can be held if all the parties make a request to a tribunal and tribunal considers necessary, and therefore leading evidence in 29B is only if all the parties agree. And secondly, the tribunal may dispense with any of the technical formalities during the oral evidence or adopt such procedure as it deems fit and proper. I would still advise you, though fast track is there in 6 months' time, but simultaneous section 29B also permits you that it is not over in 6 months' time to apply 29A and go for extension of time. If the similar procedure is followed in 29B, I would advise you that you follow normal procedure of leading oral evidence. Try to lead evidence, because most of the matters I have seen succeeding and best of the matters losing in evidence. So evidence is very important. Keep in mind before that any arbit tribunal, your evidence is your best point, and see to it that you plead a proper evidence.
So today's situation, physical verification of documents is not feasible. How to proceed for admission and denial and thereafter mark the documents?
See, now with this virtual conferences, you can scan the document, you can see the document. And suppose, for example, you have doubt about the signature or something, then you can put up this question during the cross-examination, or you can call for the original document. It can be sent to you in a different manner. So it can, the arbitrator can call for it. There is no bar. But what happens is it's much better because scanned copies are sent to each other. You can see the whole document and decide whether a particular document requires to be produced in original. If it is required to be produced in original, the arbitrator will fix up a meeting in particular fashion that party can produce. One person can go and produce a document and one can inspect. But that is in respect of one or two documents which are important. Otherwise, you can see on the net itself and decide.
Sir, as you have mentioned, all documents denied have to be proved by us.
Yes.
So, while drafting evidence, isn't it necessary to go with the flow of the case? For instance, if correspondence is admitted and the document which is denied, which is relied on in the evidence is denied, do I have to mention and prove both the documents?
No, the documents which are admitted need not form part of the evidence at all because that will be clearly admitted. You are not tendering. You have to tender those documents which are denied and which you are proving through your evidence. So if the document is admitted during the admission denial, you can make an amendment also that this document is admitted during the admission denial of document. So no further thing is required. If it is denied, then of course you have to prove and tender that document by putting this question. It is signed by me, contents are correct, and then you can tender it.
How is the amendment in 2019 with regard to establishment of arbitral council catering to the needs of arbitration proceedings?
Arbitral tribunal is going to be a field of the day by virtual conferences which are required in with this pandemic going on and how long will it go on. It's always advisable to have arbitration because I have been conducting arbitrations. I have been appearing before the tribunals and we have got 3 arbitral tribunal also where I have been arguing and we are doing on Zoom. And it's very convenient. It's not difficult at all. Only thing is we are not recording evidence because some parties are objected to and therefore under the guidelines issued by courts, unless the parties have consented, evidence may not be recorded on Zoom. But otherwise, arguments can take place and it's very convenient. So I don't think it's difficult in this situation also.
Can you guide us on the important points to be covered in arbitration clause of any agreement so as to ensure proper and smooth trial in case the clause needs to be invoked before the arbitration tribunal?
See, as far as arbitration agreement is concerned, why to be put in is only the name of the arbitrator if is necessary or giving opportunity to each side to appoint their own arbitrator. You can have a separate clause that in case the arbitration invoked, the procedure will be followed in a particular manner and the whole procedure can be set out in that agreement. So that if it's set out, then under section 19, the arbitrator will follow that procedure. So suppose, for example, in that you have said that both the parties agree that all the documents will be proved in required by law, then automatically it will be proved by required by law of evidence and CPC also. Arbitrator is not bound by it, but parties can always agree to something between them. That type of clauses are there to avoid multiplicity of proceedings. You can put these type of clauses that this is being agreed between the parties and this is how the procedure will be followed by the concerned tribunal.
Can admission and denial be deferred post filing of affidavit of evidence and marking of documents?
No, it cannot be deferred because that is the base for you to draft your affidavit and marking of document. How will you mark a document without knowing whether the other side is admitting or not admitting this document? How will you prepare your affidavit of evidence unless you know that the other side is admitting or not admitting the document? Therefore, admission denial is a condition precedent to your affidavit of evidence or marking of documents.
In an arbitration case between a housing society and developer, can the original evidence given by the secretary of society be discarded and some other evidence given by the new secretary being added?
The question is what type of evidence you are talking about. That evidence is no evidence because evidence will come before the tribunal. So if there is some documentary evidence to show that certain thing was admitted by him, then you have to bring that previous secretary into witness box, prove that aspect of the matter. New secretary can't give it unless the new old secretary is not available at all. Then you can prove through documentary evidence.
That was the last question. On behalf of PLE, sir, a heartfelt gratitude for such a lucid and interesting session. Thank you very much, sir.